the streaming both on Facebook and YouTube. Welcome everybody to Veterans Breakfast Club on YouTube and Facebook.
I'm admitting everybody.
Yeah, this for the streamers. This is Glenn Flickinger. Some of you may not know me. I'm a member of the board of directors, and I do these Greatest Generation Live programs. Todd is not with us tonight, and neither is Sean. And once everybody's on board, we'll explain. Have you let everybody in now,
We
Brad?
got a couple more joining us.
Okay.
Bob just joined us. Joining. Hey, John Luckadoo's here.
On Luckadoo. Wow. Yeah.
Where is he? Oh. Hey, John.
We'll have to unmute him. He's probably not unmuted yet, Jim. So let me start for our audience.
Go ahead.
Let me start with the audience. We've got everybody let in now, and a few more are joining us as we go on. My name is Glenn Flickinger. For those of you who may be new, I imagine most of you have seen me before. You have the sort of second team tonight in that Todd is off at a lecture on the other side of town, and Sean is under the weather. So it is myself and Brad Washabaugh. Brad, please say hello.
Hello, everybody. Brad Washabaugh here, the wingman, officially designated. I normally don't fly. I'm a ground person, but I can be a wingman tonight. I can shoot down a watch just like a good aviator.
Yeah. All those years in the infantry, Marine Corps infantry, now you're flying. Now you're a wingman. And Todd walked us through all the technical background here, so I think we're okay. I think I've got the streaming up and going, and we're admitting our Zoom audience. So again, for those of you who don't know me, Glenn Flickinger, Veterans Breakfast Club, and this is Greatest Generation Live. For the past going on 4 months now, we've been focusing on Masters of the Air. And the air war over Europe in general, in sort of a broader context. We've had a dozen great guests, from Don Miller, Roger Orloff last week, who was the scriptwriter for Masters of the Air. We've had many 3 or 4 veterans on, and several authors on as well. So we're continuing tonight with Jim Blakely. Jim, please say hello.
Hello.
Okay. All the way from Dallas, Texas. And for those of us Steeler fans, like I said to Jim, nobody's perfect, but we'll let him on the show. Jim is the son of Everett Blakely, who, if you saw Masters of the Air miniseries or TV series, was featured quite a bit and was with, obviously, the 100th Bomb Group. And Jim's going to give us a couple of very interesting PowerPoint presentations in a little bit once we get started. Looking forward to that. And who do we have on? We heard Lucky Luckadoo. I heard Lucky was on. Let me go to the gallery view here. If we could get Lucky's mic on, let's say hello to Lucky.
Okay.
Lucky, how you doing?
I'll ask him to unmute.
Okay.
Hi, Jim.
Hey, Lucky. Good evening.
Good seeing you as always.
And likewise.
Thanks for joining us, Lucky. We've got obviously Jim Blakely on tonight talking about his father, Ev, who I imagine you knew pretty well.
I did indeed. And as Jim knows only too well, shared with him the horror of the Bremen raid on October the 8th of 1943, which was also mentioned in the documentary.
Yeah.
But I couldn't miss this opportunity to join Jim because I guess I'm one of the few people who was there and did fly with his dad. And I think that it's most fortunate is that Jim is thoroughly familiar with the account within his dad's airplane on that particular mission by Harry Crosby, who was a member of the crew, the navigator on the crew, and gave such an explicit and detailed account of what it was like for them to barely make it back to England on that fateful day.
Yeah. And Jim does an excellent presentation on the mission to Bremen. I've got the PowerPoint. I've looked at it very closely. But to be sure everybody understands, he's not going to do that tonight. Time is our enemy. And there's two other presentations, excellent presentations that Jim is going to do. And then we'll do the Bremen mission another night in the future. And then we're going to go with Jim for the first hour or so of the program. And then I'm going to recognize three other veterans of the 8th Air Force tonight. I'm hoping one or two of their loved ones are on tonight. There are people from, two of them from the Pittsburgh area and one from Minneapolis or Minnesota. John Stolil. John Stolil, are you, I don't see your name up. Do we see a John Stolil anywhere?
Yes, he is here, and I'll ask him to unmute. John?
Hello, good evening, everybody. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you.
There you are. I see you, John. Yeah, thank you for joining us. John's been a loyal follower for the past 2 or 3 months. Got to know him a little bit. I think I made a little comment about 12 o'clock high one night. And that
Yes.
prompted an interesting email from John and a story about his father and 12 o'clock high, which we'll tell you a little bit later in the program. Okay, do we have any of the other World War II veterans on tonight besides Lucky? I know Ed is traveling. Ed travels more than I do. I don't I don't know how he does that, but he's constantly traveling. Joe McCarthy, thank you for joining. I see somebody named here, Chapter President Mark Rosenthal.
Yes, I'll ask him to unmute and maybe he can identify himself.
Mark, can you hear us?
Yes, sir, I can.
Well, the last name really caught my attention. Related to Rosie Rosenthal.
No, it's actually pronounced Rosensteel.
Ah, it's so tiny in the print. I missed that. I'm sorry. Okay. And where are you coming from? Because I don't recognize you from listening before.
I've popped in a couple of times, only when you were wrapping up a few of your get-togethers, and I've recently joined your membership and whatnot, and I'm a chapter president for Keystone Paralyzed Veterans.
Welcome. We're very pleased to have you. We'd like to get to know you better, I'm sure. Okay. We'll exchange some information here, and if you put your contact information in the chat, then we'll get closer to you.
Sounds good.
Okay. Without any further ado, if I'm capable here on the technical side, we're going to start with I think it's a fascinating piece of the story. It's not the combat piece of the story at all. If you watch the Apple TV series, you'll remember that occasionally there are a couple little kids hanging around the hard stands, talking to the mechanics and so forth. And Jim is going to tell us the real story of those children. So Jim, let me see if I can get this going here correctly. And
Now,
then,
Glenn, if there are comments, we welcome the audience to put them in the chat or to raise their hand, right?
yes,
Either visually or down there in the bottom of the screen, there's a place for reactions where somebody can raise their hand and we'll try to get to them during the presentation.
right, exactly. Okay, now let me get to the start of this somewhere here. What happened to slideshow? I had slideshow at one point here. I just got too many things happening here. Excuse my fumbling. Where do I start here it is. Maybe this is it. No. I'm sorry. I thought I had this teed up and ready to go, folks, and now I don't. There it is. Now I got it. There we go. Okay. Sorry for the delay. So, Jim, tell us about Sam Hurry. That's an interesting last name.
Yes, well, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Is my audio on?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I want to thank two people. And of course, one of them's Lucky. Lucky, you've been an inspiration. You are a national treasure. Your voice is absolutely fabulous. And you live close to me. Thank you, Lucky. Secondly, I'd like to thank Nancy Putman. I don't see her on my screen right now, but Nancy is the editor to Splasher 6, which, if anybody joins the 100th Bomb Group Foundation, is the quarterly newsletter. She knows 10 times what I know and has done an excellent job editing Splasher 6. Okay. Now,
Jim, Nancy is with us. She's in the audience. Nancy Putnam is in the audience.
okay, good. Yeah, I just can't, the way it's arranged, I don't see her on my screen.
Okay.
But thank you, Nancy. Okay, so Sam Hurry, let's get on with his story. Sam Hurry was a boy who at the start of the war was 9 years old, lived real close to the base, and was 12 years old when the war was over. In essence, he was adopted by the ground crews at the 100th Bomb Group. Next slide, please.
Yep.
Can I do the next slide?
If you can, if you're probably not now that I'm sharing the screen. So actually, it'd be a little complicated, Jim.
Okay.
Just tell me next slide, and I'll keep moving along.
Okay. So this is a photo from the TV series. Sammy was 9. His friend Billy was 2 years older. He lived less than a half a mile from the base and would drive his bicycle to the base. And the book that was shown on the previous slide, he wrote in 2006. It is very difficult to get a copy of this. I just talked to the people at the museum on the base, and they said they have 6 copies left. So it's my goal to see if it gets reprinted. Billy actually lived on the base, and they shared on the TV series. There are 2 events which you might remember. One is they pour gasoline on one of the hard stands and light it. And that was because each engine on a B-17 had a 35-gallon oil tank. And these things leaked a lot, and they made a big mess on the hard stands. And from time to time, they would pour 100 octane gasoline and light it, and that would clean up the hard stand. So that's one of the scenes in this TV series. And the other one is that they're sitting in the pilot and co-pilot seat of one of the planes, and they're playing like they're fighting the war. Those are the 2 scenes that I can recall where they are featured. Next slide. Sam was born in Dickelberg, which is, as I said, very close to the base. A lot of old buildings still there. Next slide. He went to school next to the church and spent the vast majority of his time during daylight hours at the base and not in school. And his technique of playing hooky was that he would come to school early. He would be there when the roster was called, and then he would ask to go to the bathroom. Well, the bathroom wasn't in the building, it was in an outhouse. And he would, it would be, the liquid would be frozen in the winter and he'd have a lot of flies in the summer. But he escaped from the outhouse and went to the base. Next slide. This is a photo of the control tower, and that plane beyond, is that your plane, Lucky? You were close to the control tower, weren't you?
Yes, our hard stand was right next to the control tower, and that quite possibly is our airplane, Sunny or Sunny 2.
Right. Okay.
I can't identify it though, Jim, from this photo.
Yeah, that's okay. But that's where your position was.
It would be.
And then in front of that, you can see a tent. And the ground crews typically lived in tents like this because they had to care for the planes during the night and couldn't be very far away. But the control tower has been refurbished as a museum. And when you go to the 100th Bomb Group, that's what you'll see is the museum and the control tower and 3 associated buildings behind it, all museums. And I encourage you strongly to go there. It's a wonderful place. And the English people in this part of the country called East Anglia love us. I found a way to loosen their tongues when we were at dinner. You give them a glass of wine, and boy, they will talk to you forever. And it's a wonderful experience, and it loosens up their tongue. On the top of that is the control tower where featured in the TV series. And there is on a table a map, which I will go into later. Next slide. So the actor on the right and the real Sam Hurry on the left. Next slide.
Jim, is the real Sam Hurry still with us?
No, he passed this century. I can't give you a year.
Okay.
So where is the 100th Bomb Group? It's at Thorpe Abbott's, which is about 90 miles north and east of London. It's a quick train ride, or if you're bold enough to be able to drive on the wrong side of the road in a rented car, it's easy to get to. It's in an area called East Anglia, and all 40 of the American bomber bases were located in this area of East Anglia. Next slide. This is the tabletop map in the control tower, and at the top was the squadron that Lucky was in. And then on the right-hand side of the picture is another squadron. And then below there are 2 squadrons. One to the right side of the screen is where Bucky Clevin was. And the one to the left side is where my dad, Bucky Egan, Rosie Rosenthal, and Harry Crosby were stationed. Now, you'll see a group of woods, and in the center of the woods is a building kind of H-shaped. That's the hospital. And I've had several people who were alive at the time of the war tell me they would pass by this and hear the cries of the suffering airmen. It's quite a touching thing. Down below was where, and if I it was where Sammy was taken to eat. I guess I'll get into that later.
Let me ask a question, if I could, of Lucky. 3 different runways there, Lucky. Explain how you use those 3 different runways.
Well, the main runway was the east-west runway, the one at the top here. And that was the one that normally the prevailing winds would dictate that we would use, and it was also the longest runway. There were also crossing runways that we could use in emergencies, or if the wind shifted substantially and we didn't want to land in crosswinds, and we could utilize those. But this was the main runway, this north or east-west runway here, that we would normally utilize as our main landing and takeoff runway.
Thank you. Thank you. Those other 2 look pretty short to take off from.
Right. So you can see the hard stands, most of them had the shape of a frying pan, and they were called frying pan loops. The figure of 8 in the lower right-hand corner could have more planes. At the beginning, there were the 36 original crews, and there were 50 hard stands. So there were several available. But at the end of the war, there were 72 planes, and they had to double up on some of these hard stands.
Wow.
They also referred to them as dispersal points. When you included the tent and the maintenance crews and other paraphernalia, they got that name. All right, next slide, please. All right, now we're going to be on this slide for a while. At the top, on the left-hand side, you could see a road that's going towards the main runway. And that's where Sam Hurry came. And then he would turn on to the road that's got hedges on both sides, called the Common Road, and go north of the base. There was no fence, and Sam Hurry could go through the hedges and get on the base anytime he wanted to at multiple points. There was a guard station close to the road that he came in on that was supposed to stop uninvited guests, but the guard always let him through. In fact, gave him candy and chocolate. In essence, encouraged him to come in. Once he got onto the base, the ground crews loved him. Now, the ground crews were there for the whole war, pretty much. The flyboys would fly early in the war, their 25 missions, and most of them went back. But the ground crew stayed there for the duration, and they had a tough go of it. Again, one of the few advantages they had was that they could meet more English girls because they were there longer. But they adopted Sam. He was a skinny kid. They took him down to the mess hall and fed him. Initially, he would be fed on one plate, meat, potatoes, carrots, peas, and he was astounded that they also put dessert on the same plate, because apparently that's not done in Britain. And he got used to it, and he thought that the dessert got along well with the rest of the food. And there's all kinds of humorous passages in this book, and that's what made it so endearing to me. His mother started a business of doing the laundry, and he would deliver and pick up the soiled laundry from the airmen, and his mother would launder it, and then he would return it. And there was there were occasions when they couldn't dry the clothes. And what he would do was go to find a clothesline, hang up the clothes, ask one of the airmen to start up the engines on a B-17 and blow on the clothes to dry them. He was a gopher for the airmen. They would have him get tools for them in the tool shed, and the officer or the sergeant in charge of the tool shed would only let them take the clothing if they could spell the word miscellaneous. And Billy wrote down on a piece of paper miscellaneous, and they were always able to get the tools they wanted, not only to fix the B-17s, but also their bicycles. The airmen would teach Billy and Sammy how to start an engine. It would save them the effort of getting up in the cockpit. And one at a time, they would teach Sammy to flip this switch or flip that switch and rotate this dial to start an engine, which they did. That's hard to believe, but they did. Sammy was a smoker at the beginning of the war. I guess a lot of people smoked, including my dad, but he liked Chesterfields. And the airmen would often put in their dirty launder package packs of cigarettes and tins of food for his family. And this endeared the locals to the airmen. Sammy said that occasionally the airmen would have a sense of humor, and they would watch somebody coming down that road just north of the airfield on a bicycle. And they would start up the motor and attempt to blow the bicyclist off of the road with the wind from the engines. Also, they would play around with bullets. You know, this is a 50 caliber bullet that all the machine guns on a B-17 had, pretty big. Sammy would put it into a vise. He would put a nail through a board and attempt to sometimes successfully shoot off that bullet. Boy, you talk about dangerous.
Lucky he lived through it. Lucky,
yes.
Another lucky guy, Lucky.
Yes.
Let me ask Lucky a question. Lucky, do you have any memory of these children at the airfield?
Very vague. We didn't have much opportunity to associate with them. The ground crews did because they were there much longer, and the kids would come out in the dark because most of the maintenance was performed overnight, and it was often in the rain and the cold and the dark. And these kids would be out all hours of the day and night, coming onto the airfield. And as Jim says, they would be lavished with chocolate and chewing gum and all of the food that they could hold. And they did perform through their mothers and families some of the functions, of course, that both the ground crews and the air crews required. So they became a really an essential part of our economy and our working operations. But actually, personally, I didn't have much contact with them.
And that's what Sammy says in his book. The only officer he can remember meeting was the supply officer for one of the squadrons. He didn't remember talking to flying crews. He was in a different world. He was with the engineers, the guys fixing the plane. So to reward Sammy, the guys got together, collected a fund. They took Sammy to London, stayed in a hotel room, and bought him new clothes, including a coat and a new shirt, a pair of pants, a pair of shorts, shoes, and socks. And this photograph is of him with the ground crew in his London bought outfit. Now, the thing he remembers about the hotel the most was not his new clothes, but the fact they had a toilet there. And he had never flushed toilets. And so he spent an hour flushing and reflushing this toilet in the hotel with joy. And there's other stories, and I encourage you to read the book. It's really good. Next picture.
That is really a cute story.
This is the mess hall where they took Sammy and Billy, and he really loved the food. Next. So here he is with his London outfit on, with a different crew right in front of their tent. He, in 1945, December, when everybody left, he was downright depressed because his joyous memories were now over, and he had to learn to cope with it. And he did. He went back to school, even graduated, got a degree, and got married, had 2 sons, and lived happily until he died in the early 2000s. And his son is now working at the museum as a volunteer. So that's Sam Hurry's story.
That's just a great, great story. That's such a human interest story behind all the horrible things that, we saw and have heard about. Brad, anybody in the chat room with comments that we ought to address or questions?
There were some questions on the layout of the airfield. The control tower that was pictured in the slideshows is still there in the same location. And I think that was answered in the chat. And also, were there numbers painted on the runways like we see nowadays? Lucky, would you know?
I don't remember they're putting numbers on the runways.
And let me see if there's any other questions. I think that's about it.
Anybody like to raise their hand and ask Jim or Lucky any question?
And Nancy, you can correct me later.
Oh, I see her there. Hi, Nancy. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Let me, before we transition to the next presentation that Jim has, Jim, let me ask you this question. What was your impression of the portrayal of your father on television in that series, in the Apple TV series?
Like most other relatively minor characters, I wish it was a bigger role, but I like the guy. I met him at the premiere in Los Angeles. He had watched a video that I did of my dad in 1989 before he got Alzheimer's.
Mm.
And he really appreciated it. It helped him to get an accent like my dad's. And I loved the whole series. It was really fabulous. And I thank Apple for paying for it. I thank Orloff for writing it, and the 100th Bomb Group for doing what they did, making it all possible.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're going to go to another presentation here, and let me go through the same technical issues, which I think I'm going to be better at this time because it's
Well, while you're doing that, Glenn, I think Greg Yost had a question. Greg, if you want to ask your question now, go, please.
Yes, it wasn't that important, and I just sort of was going to throw it in when people said, "Hey, do you have a question?" A few people brought this up in some of the other programs, and did anyone? I was out at the Allegheny County Airport a few years ago where they brought in a B-17, a flying B-17, a flying B-24, and flying B-54, and you go out there and you visit and everything. So it was great. I was there when they took off to the next destination. And one of the things I remembered on that takeoff was the smell. Just, I mean, there were 2 or 3 planes taking off, and it just, I mean, it was very obvious. I can't imagine what it was like with hundreds. What were the comments on that? This came up in one of the, maybe last week or 2 weeks ago or something like that. No one talks about that, but that had to be a significant aspect of an airfield when the takeoff, the smell. Just a random comment.
I don't have any comment about the smell because maybe it was individual to the plane that you were dealing with. But what I remember is the sound and the beauty of the plane. It was a national treasure. And it had a unique sound, just like a Harley Davidson. It was a wonderful sound. That in Dallas, the one group had, you could rent a ride on the B-17 a few years ago before the last accident, and they would come right over my house, and I knew who it was when they came. It was fabulous experience, and I hope we can get some of them back in the air at some point, but I think I'll forego riding one for a while.
Joe McCarthy has his hand raised.
Yes. Go ahead, Joe.
Good evening, Glenn, and nice to hear you talk, Jim, and especially Lucky to hear his stories. Just is a thrill. It's such a treat to hear Lucky talk. I could hear him talking about painting a fence. But anyway, my question is for Jim. My dad used to always talk and compliment his pilot. His name was Charlie Bratcher. He was in the 91st Bomb Group, 322nd Squadron. So Jim, who did your father talk about? Who did he look up to and fondly when he spoke of his time with the 100th Bomb Group?
He was good friends with Harry Crosby and Rosenthal after the war, and you'll see them in photos at the reunions. And McClellan, his ball turret gunner, and he shared a birthday, July 1st. Dad was 4 years older than Bill, and they'd have a contest every birthday to see who could call the other one first. So they had a good time. He talked to Charlie Vi. Harry Crosby, by the way, returned the favor when he was in Dallas signing his book. I took my son. He says to my son, "Your dad saved my life." How good does that make me feel? My God. So anyway, he would talk about other crew members and other people, but he always said the biggest heroes, of course, were the dead. And there were lots of them in the 100th Bomb Group.
Yeah. Just a quick follow-up, Jim. Did I get this right? Was your dad's plane the plane that had the most shoot downs, fighter plane shoot downs during the war in one mission?
Yes, that's the Bremen mission, which we hopefully will talk about in the future. But on the Bremen mission, and I'll shorten it, they lost 2 engines, so they were out of formation, almost going down. And the Luftwaffe attacked time after time after time for 90 minutes. And the gunners claimed that they got 12 Nazis down, but they got credit for 9. So it was a very important mission. In fact, I have a half-price bookstore near me, and I could go in there and find these books that were published in the 80s and 70s and 90s. And I'd look in the table of contents. I found this mission mentioned 24 times in 24 books.
Yeah.
So it was a big deal, and it got a lot of press at the time. And in the Masters of the Air, they talk about the mission at the beginning of one of the episodes. They don't show it, but they talk about it. It was also the same mission that Bucky Cleven went down on, and maybe that's why they didn't show it. I don't know, because they would have had to shown both planes. But anyway, yes, that's the correct. You're absolutely correct about that.
Glenn,
Okay.
we have
One
no-
other hand raised. Let's take one more question, then we got to move on to the next presentation.
Go ahead, John.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. I had the pleasure of living 2 doors away from a World War II B-17, and he was an RBO, radar bomber observer, and they had a specific set of wings for him and everything. This was later on in the war, and I think the Twilight Zone actually did a thing called Bomb Through Overcast, where they were able to get a rudimentary picture of what was underneath of them so they could drop bombs through the clouds. But more importantly, and you guys probably already talked about this, I'm sorry I came in late. He talked to me about Rosenthal, and he spoke about Rosenthal as though Rosenthal was a god. And he had some marvelous stories about Rosie and his dedication and his insistence that he was going to stay in Great Britain and he was going to fly missions until the Nazis were absolutely eradicated. And you may have covered that already, or maybe that's coming up.
No, we didn't cover it. And you're exactly right. He was an incredible pilot, self-sacrificing, a great communicator, and deserves every second of airtime that he got in Masters of the Air. He was a true hero.
From what Bill Fogel told me, the guy was just possessed, and really did a lot of heroic airmanship. Bill told me, and whether it's true or not, I don't know. Rosenthal never refused a mission, ever.
He had 52 missions under his belt. And of course, he could have left after 25, but he signed up again. He was an incredible pilot. His plane was downed over France. He got returned to England, and then, of course, it was downed over Poland. And that is in the last episode of Masters of the Air.
Yeah, that series was incredible. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Let's move on. Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Let's move on to this next presentation, 100th Bomb Group Bunkhouse. Would you like me to go to the next slide, Jim? How do you want to start?
No, let me start here. first, I'm going to show some slides of the sequence of events of the airmen in my dad's barracks. And the pertinent part is how they were evacuated from the barracks. And then I'll go into pictures of the air crews with comments about specific members of those crews. So first slide. Yeah, so in 1943, the base was finished, including Dad's barracks. Next. And they moved in 16 beds. There were 10 airmen on each B-17, 6 gunners who slept together, and 4 officers who slept together. And this is representative of my dad's air crew. They came in all together. I'll put them in one at a time, but really they came in all together. The first air crew is Woodard's crew. Next slide. Woodard was the pilot. He was tall, 6'4", probably longer than the bed. But that was an experience he commonly had. His navigator, Casamatis Thompson, the co-pilot. Next. Then my dad's crew. The 4 officers are standing on the right side, and the 6 airmen are below and to the left. This photograph was taken just before the Bremen mission, probably on the same day.
Am I circling the right fellow here for your father?
No, he's next, the shorter guy.
Ah, okay.
That's Dad right there. I didn't want to draw attention to him because that's too self-serving.
I'll do it for you.
Okay. Next slide. So they occupied 4 beds. Next slide. Then came Brady's crew. Brady is the guy with a lot of hair and his shirt off, sitting down. That's Brady. And you might remember his crew. Let me tell you how to remember his crew. You remember in the first episode, there's a plane that comes in, the navigator, who's Harry Crosby, misses England, and they fly close to German occupied Europe, and they're shot at. Well, that's Brady's plane. Then they proceed to Thorpe Abbott's, at which point they have a belly landing because landing gear won't go down. That's Brady's plane. Prior to that, he lost 2 planes in the United States, also not his fault, due to mechanical problems. Next slide.
Do you know, is this photo taken in North Africa?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Dressed like that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So Brady's crew, the officers occupy the next 4 beds. Next slide. And then standing up on the right is Charles Cruikshank. He had the nickname of Crankshaft that my dad used. In the TV series, he's referred to as Crank.
Yeah. I have to say, this is one time where the actor who portrayed this man, Cruikshank, the actor was not as handsome as this guy. They made a casting mistake there.
Well, okay. So they occupied the last 4 bunks. So we got 4 crews. And what happens to these crews? Next slide. On September 7th, there is a mission to Stuttgart. Woodard gets hit pretty bad, and he knows he's going to have to crash because his plane is losing altitude. He heads for Switzerland because Stuttgart is in the southern part of Germany, close to Switzerland. He gets over what he thinks is Switzerland, hits the bailout button. Everybody bails out except for him, and he follows shortly thereafter. Well, it turns out he was over Switzerland, but the wind blew all the other crewmates back into Germany. They end up in German POW camps. Woodard ends up in a Swiss internment camp. Now, Swiss internment camps were not very nice, actually, probably pretty close to what a POW camp amounted to. If you were interned, you'd much rather be interned in Sweden than in Switzerland. Next slide. Then on October 8th, Blakely goes on his Bremen mission, which Lucky also was on. And we'll go into the heroism in that later. But there's one crew member missing. Vi gets shot, and it goes in on next to one hip, comes out next to the other hip. So it goes sideways through his body, cuts his nerve, and he has pain the rest of his life. Although he didn't die and he survived the hospital, he committed suicide in about 1965. And I think it was probably due to the pain that he suffered as a consequence of the war. Next slide. Then on the Munster mission, in which 12 out of 13 planes went down, Brady's crew went down, and they are MIA. Next slide. And then on the same mission, Cruikshank or Crankshaft's crew also goes down. Now, these guys become MIA. Their relatives are sent telegrams saying that they were shot down, but the family doesn't know if they're alive or dead. They don't know if their plane exploded or they parachuted out, or if they're an evadee. So there's a lot of anxiety from the time you get that first telegram to the time that you find out what the status is of your loved one. And it could be a month later before the family got another telegram. Usually through the Red Cross would find out who was in what POW camp. And of course, if you were an evadee, you wouldn't know if your loved one was alive or dead. So there was a lot of anxiety in being a mission in action. Sure. Next slide. So by October 10th, there's only 3 out of 16 left. And these guys have to fly 10 more missions. How would that make you feel? I would be scared to death. All these guys shot down. I don't know if they're alive or dead. It must have been very anxiety prone. Next.
To say the least. Like, it's unimaginable.
Luck has it. This is unbelievable. All those guys survived the war. All of them. All the POWs survived the war. And in the lower right, we got Crankshaft. In the middle, Hambone Hamilton. On the left, my dad. Top row on the left, Casamatis. next is Harry Crosby. And next is Brady. And next, I don't know. Nancy, you'll have to tell me who that is. So they, there are friendships that are forged in combat that are probably stronger than any other friendship that a person could have. And Dad would talk about these guys. Next. Okay, so now let's go over individuals. Woodard is in the bottom row. He's the tall guy, 6'4", and next to him on the right, kneeling, is Casamatis. He has a restaurant in St. Louis, and he was the best poker player in the group. And he would play poker with the guys that had more money, the generals and the colonels, and he would take their money. And he was much admired for doing that by all the captains and the sergeants, and he was real good at it. He looks me up in the 1995 reunion in Fort Worth, one of the few that I ever went to, brings me a letter. And that letter had this story behind it. On his way over to England in 1943, he steals a dog in Newfoundland, takes him over to England, and then he stays in the squadron. They feed him. When he becomes a POW, he writes his sister in St. Louis a letter. The sister sends a letter to my dad, who had been promoted to squadron commanding officer at the time, and asks, can the dog be sent back via airplane to the United States to be with his sister? And my dad writes him a letter, writes the sister a letter saying, no, we can't do that. We don't have transportation for dogs. And furthermore, the dog is eating the farmer's chickens and he's getting quite fat. So that's a true story. Next slide. So I can't thank enough Harry Crosby, standing, yes, there, right there. That's Harry Crosby, for writing the book. And without that book, I wouldn't be here. And if you read the book, it lends itself to a movie.
Yeah.
I mean, Frank Murphy also wrote a book, and it is much more encyclopedic and took a lot more research, but it doesn't lend itself to a movie. Harry Crosby's book did, and you can buy Wing and a Prayer on Amazon. It's fabulous. Then the other story, Douglas, the bombardier on the right standing, is the only person in the TV series that I saw that told us a joke. And he's in the officers club. He bets the other airman next to him that he can get the pretty girl across the hall to laugh within a minute. So he goes over, approaches the girl, tells her about the bet, and he says, do you know the difference between a hippo and a Zippo? She doesn't answer. A hippo is heavy and a Zippo's a lighter. So that's his part.
You won the bet, right?
Yes. And on the left standing is McClellan, the ball turret gunner. He gets shot up bad on the Bremen mission. A large piece of flak goes into his thigh. It's such a big hole, and he wants to know if the bone is broken, the femur. He reaches in the hole and feels that the bone is not broken. So he considered that good, but he did spend 22 months in the hospital because of the injury. Below him is Lester Saunders, who took a 20 millimeter cannon shot in the gut, and he died on the mission. And then over to is Yevich, who got hit by the same bullet that went through Lester Saunders, hit him in the forearm, and he had a compound fracture. And next to him with the airman's cap on is Lyle Nord. And I've had wonderful discussions with his great niece, who just absolutely adores him. And so he didn't finish his missions because the plane was totaled. And he had to find another plane, which he did, but he died on that plane. So he's a casualty of the war too. And one of the things that touches me most about him when I see it is his niece sent me this photograph of the flag that was in Lyle Nord's mother's house. That was given, it was a gold star flag that was given to family who had members die during the war. So she was hung this thing on her door for the rest of her life. It's quite touching. Next slide. Brady crew. And yes, this is at the end of the Regensburg mission where they land in Algeria. And obviously they didn't have air conditioning. But Hambone Hamilton is standing with his shirt off on the left. And he can be recognized in the series because he has 2 gold teeth when he smiles. And he didn't take much to studies when he was young before he went into the Army Air Force. But once he got in the POW camp, he enjoyed reading in the library so much that he got impetus to go back to school, get a degree. He ended up in life as the chairman of the engineering department at the University of Pittsburgh.
Oh.
And next to him, I think that's Solomon. Solomon was Jewish and a POW, so he had a little bit more reason to be concerned about his treatment as a POW. But in fact, he was treated pretty well. The Luftwaffe, who controlled the POW camps, did not come down hard on the Jews. There's a scene where one of the German guards gives him a little bit of a hard time. And then later on the frozen march to Moosburg with the snow flying, that same German officer falls down. Solomon picks him up, takes his rifle, and carries it. And that actually happened, maybe not to Solomon, but it actually happened that the Americans would carry the guards' firearms at times. So next. The other significant book by a Hundredth Bomb Group, and I, other than Lucky's and Crosby's, but Lucky's book is excellent. I failed to mention that, but is Frank Murphy, Cruikshank is standing on the right, and next to him is Frank Murphy. It looks to me like he has a huge book. So he wrote another huge book for the 100th Bomb Group called Luck of the Draw. And his daughter is Chloe, who thank you, Brad. His daughter is Chloe Milas.
No, his granddaughter.
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 I knew you'd correct.
Granddaughter.
Thank
Yeah.
you for correcting me.
And
Yeah,
we had Chloe on the program back in early January.
she's fabulous.
Very. She's been a great fan of ours. She's introduced me to a lot of you that are on the program tonight and others. She's been fantastic.
Very good. Next slide.
I think that's it.
Well, that's it.
That's it.
Questions?
Yes. Great. Very good. Wow.
Thank you.
And to tell you, there's an article called 13 Bunks that Jim's written, which is also just well written, Jim. Very good. Let's take a few minutes for questions, and then we're going to take our station break. Anything in the chat, Brad, that we should bring up, or does anybody like to raise their hand?
Nothing in the chat. I think we were all mesmerized and just looking at those photographs and the stories behind them. It was such a riveting account. So
I think Nancy has her hand raised.
I just want to thank Jim he brings great attention to the children, and he is a father and a grandfather as well, and has done tremendous work with his grandchildren to bring these stories to life in a way that relates to young children. And I give him a lot of credit because not many people are even attempting that. But Jim, kudos for taking that under your wing. And his granddaughter, Emmy, is a YouTube star. So if no one's ever checked that out, Jim can explain to you how to do so. But they're fascinating, and he does a wonderful job. And I just want to thank him and encourage people who have children they're trying to introduce to the stories. And one of Emmy's videos on YouTube interviews Lucky about his escape kit. And he explains to her and answers her questions and shows her what an escape kit is like. And of course, every airman carried an escape kit on their missions. So I just wanted to bring that to people's attention.
Well, thank you. Yes, I need to plug for my granddaughter.
It's worth it. It's good.
My YouTube channel, if you'll type in the search bar, James Blakely, Dallas. That's where you'll find all of them. James Blakely, Dallas. Yes, and give my granddaughter some views. She is just amazing, articulate, and enthusiastic. And we would like to do some more. And Nancy, again, thank you for publishing and editing Splasher 6. It's a wonderful resource.
Yeah. Anyone who wants to join the 100th Bomb Group Foundation can get it.
Yes, and it's not an expensive membership, and you'll get to go to the reunions, and there's hundreds of people, a couple hundred people came to the last one, I think.
Right.
So it's a nice event. It's in New Orleans. Is it May?
May of next year.
May of next year, yes.
Yeah.
No.
Well, Jim, thank you very much. Unless there's other questions, we're going to take a very quick station break here right now, quicker than we normally do, because I'm in charge. And when I'm in charge, I take quick station breaks. So, Jim, don't go away. Nancy, thank you for being here. Let me just recognize our sponsors for a little bit here. And first, I want to thank all of our members, because they're the ones who really make all this happen. And it's a little bit like when you watch public TV, This is brought to you by members like you, but we also have these couple of sponsors, and I'm not going to go into all the details you hear every week, but one of them is Tobacco Free Adagio Health. There's their quit number. There's their website, and please visit them if you'd like to get more information about quitting tobacco. I stopped when I was 16. I took a chew in the outfield of the baseball game. Never chewed again. It was bad. UPMC for life, UPMC health plan Medicare program. They help you with resource. They have lots of resources for veterans. They'd love to hear from you about taking care of your health insurance. One of our great sponsors. They do lots of great in-person events with us here that most of you on the internet don't get to attend. And then finally, we'll just promote our magazine. This is the latest edition. I have to tell you, the lead article, 1983 Year Apparel, written by Todd, of course, is just brilliant. 1983, I was a fairly young man living abroad at the time. And all this that went on, I had no clue it was going on and how close we came to nuclear war in 1983. And Todd just brings it out extremely, extremely well. So that is our station break. Did I do okay, Brad? Can't hear you, Brad. Okay. Is everybody else still hearing me, I hope?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay.
Now, I gave you a B+.
B+.
Glenn, just a little room for improvement, keep you on your toes.
Yeah, you gotta push me to improve. There's no doubt about that. So I'll do better at commercials next time. So I just had the great privilege over the last 3 or 4 months of hearing all these stories, Lucky stories, Ed Cottrell stories, Peter Burrs, who's not with us tonight, Les Schrenk, who we had, and in person hearing the veterans is just spine tingling. But I've also heard stories from lots of other sources, and really too numerous to cover every single one that we hear about. But I thought I'd take just a few minutes tonight on 3 different stories and recognize these veterans' contribution to the 8th Air Force, to the war effort, to our country. Names that are not well known. John, are you with us still? Brad, could you look at John Stolil and see if we can unmute him, please? He was there at the beginning.
Yes, I'm with you. Hello.
Hello, John. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Well, thank you for having me. You have a wonderful organization there in the Veterans Breakfast Club. And what a great way to honor our veterans and keep their memories alive. And
Well,
Mr. Luckado, I'm very honored to be on the same program with you.
Well, thank you, John. And up there, you're in Minneapolis, right?
Yes.
And you're part of the Don Patton crew, if I can put it that way.
Yes. My dad was on the panel a couple of times with Don Patton's wonderful World War II historical group here in Minnesota.
So the other couple of shows ago, actually probably a couple of months ago, there was a question about somebody asked me what my favorite World War II movie was, and I instantly said 12 O'Clock High. I think it's classic. All credit to Tom Hanks, et cetera, with his latest Masters of the Air. I still put 12 O'Clock High right up there. And that's when John contacted me. John, why did you contact me? What's the story behind that?
Well, if you can put that picture up of there's my dad holding his officer's picture, and that's the original A2 jacket that he wore during the war through 31 missions. He's now passed away. He passed away in September of 2020 at 99 years old. There's his crew. That's my dad standing in the second row there in the middle.
How old do you think about that time?
He was 22 right at that age, or at that time. I think that was taken in probably December of 1943.
Wow. Okay. And there's the picture that sort of started this conversation, John.
Yeah.
What's the story behind it?
Well, what happened? That's a picture of my dad's plane, Misbehaven. That's Missbea Haven, Haven. On one mission they went to, and my dad couldn't remember the mission. They were briefed that morning that there'd be combat photographers on the mission. And so the combat photographer took that film and also that picture and gave it to my father. And I have that, obviously. That's the original picture and the original frame. What happened is that the film was used in the movie 12 O'Clock High. There's a sequence in there where there's 3 B-17s going up and down. And you fans of 12 O'Clock High probably remember that. The middle plane, Misbehaven, that's my dad.
So your dad had a minor role in the movie 12 O'Clock High.
Right, unpaid.
Unpaid, yeah. Maybe he
But I
should
remember that
back.
when I was a child. I remember that very well. My dad and I used to watch World War II movies, and I remember the first time I saw 12 O'Clock High and that sequence or that film sequence came on, my dad yelled out, "There's my plane!"
That had to be quite a thrill for him.
Yes, yes.
Here's another thrill for him I found on the bomb squadron or the bomb group website. Do you know this?
Yes, what happened, they took another B-17 up on a practice flight, and apparently the flaps and the instrument device to drop the landing gear, pull the landing gear up were close together, and the co-pilot accidentally hit the retract the landing gear, and as they're landing, of course, the landing gear collapsed, and they slid down the runway. And apparently the crew that had that plane were quite upset that, here's these rookies damaging their plane.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he was fortunate to live through this.
Yes, yes.
So your dad was part of which bomb group? The 93rd?
The 303rd.
303rd.
Right, that was Station 107. They were in Molesworth, England, and that's just northwest of Cambridge.
And the nickname was Hell's Angels.
Yes.
Not to put you on the spot, but where'd that come from?
I don't know.
Okay.
The interesting story is there was always that debate which crew or bomber flew the first 25 missions, Memphis Belle or Hell's Angels. Well, my understanding was Memphis Belle crew flew the first 25 missions, and Hell's Angel was the first bomber to fly 25 missions. But what happened when they just tried to decide which plane would go home and do a war bond tour, they thought Hell's Angels was kind of a dicey name, so they sent the Memphis Belle home.
Yeah. I've heard bits and different parts of that story before. Any of our experts, Nancy, Jim, Lucky, do you know more of that story? Who flew the first one to complete 25 missions?
That sounds right. That's the story I've heard.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the story.
But Nancy knows everything. What do you think?
We probably need to unmute Nancy, Brad. And Lucky was going to say something. Lucky, go ahead while we're waiting for Nancy.
Can you hear me?
The story I heard was that there was a plane in the 91st Bomb Group that was also named Hell's Angels.
Yes.
And that crew actually completed the first 25 missions in the European theater. They decided to send it back to the States for a bond tour, and General Andrews insisted that he take the crew back. And he did, and crashed into Iceland en route, and the crew was lost. To cover that up, the Air Corps at that time, as it was known, decided that they had to select another crew, and they selected by that time, the Memphis Belle crew,
Morgan, John, was it John Morgan was the pilot?
Morgan's crew.
Bob Morgan.
Bob Morgan.
Had had completed the tour, and they were accorded the honor of being recognized as the first crew in Europe to finish a combat tour, and they were consequently sent back to the States intact and did conduct the tour. But the Hells Angels crew that flew the first 25 missions was, I heard, also from the 91st Bomb Group, but they were lost en route back to the States.
Yeah, the Memphis Belle was the first B-17 crew to do complete 25 missions and make it back to the US. And that's how they were promoted, and that's true. They were the first one back. They weren't the first to complete 25 missions.
Add that little phrase.
Exactly.
Other story I heard was, I'm trying to remember the name of the famous filmmaker that was following the Memphis Belle. Do you remember?
Billy Wilder.
Billy
Wilder.
Wilder, excuse me. Yep.
The other story I heard is that he was actually following another crew in the same bomb group.
Yes.
That crew went down. He got in, when he found out about her, he got in his Jeep, drove around the hard stands, and saw this plane with the name Memphis Belle with the nice pinup girl on it. Heard that it was already at 20-some missions, and that's when he switched to the Memphis Belle.
Yeah, that's also true. It's all extremely well documented in these massive books on the 91st Bomb Group. All of that is true. Yeah. And it just shows, as Lucky can attest to, that these crews, they were there one day and gone the next. And Weiler had to kind of have a plan A, plan B, plan C, because he had to in order to get his footage and get a crew that could fly their plane back to the States.
I think we are indebted to Weiler because he's the only Hollywood guy that went over and shot these 16 millimeter films that have been shown in every single documentary about the air war. You'll see the same scenes over and over and over again. And that was Weiler's doing. And his daughter had some, did she have to do with the remake of Memphis Belle?
Yeah, Catherine.
Yes.
And she's the one who to this day has the rights. And she did In Cold Blue. When was that? 2018? That was released the year we were all for the Memphis Belle rollout in the museum at the Air Force Museum.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Let me come back to John and John, thank you for sharing these stories about your father. And we certainly want to honor his service. And thanks very much for speaking up and coming on the show.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Just a couple of others I want to mention. And I want to mention Bob Buckler, Pittsburgh native, still alive at 99. Is by chance, Brad, do you see his son, Jack Buckler, in the program tonight? I didn't see him earlier. It was 50-50 that he'd be able to be on tonight. Anyway, I actually met him. I don't think he is. Yeah. I met Bob back in January at a birthday party we had for Ed Cottrell. And was a pleasure to talk to him. He's 99, soon to be 100, flew 24 missions. On that 24th mission, he was shot down. Well, they weren't shot down. They were heavily damaged. They were over northern Germany, and they had to land in Sweden. He was a tail gunner,
Asked him how he became a tail gunner. He said, well, I was the last guy on the crew. All the other positions were taken, and that's where they pointed me. And that's how he became a tail gunner. This is him at that time. This is him in Sweden. And he's got some great stories. I wish we could have him on. He really doesn't have access to the internet where he is in a facility. But as far as I know, he's still pretty healthy. He has some great stories about Sweden. And this was actually his plane being towed on a Swedish airfield. So he was part of a crew of
Do you know his group?
I think I thought I had it there. Did I? No. I'm sorry, I don't. Boy, I wish Jack was on. Or there's another Veterans Breakfast Club member by the name of Bill Dedick, who has Dedick, I should say, who has gotten to know Jack very well. He's a model airplaner, Bill Dedick is, and he's built models specifically to these different men, and he has a model, a very beautiful model of that B-17 that Jack flew in. But I'm sorry, I probably heard it, but I just didn't recall. And then let me go to somebody else here. Unfortunately, I don't think they're on the program tonight. Rebecca, did we ever solve the technical issues, Brad, with getting Rebecca connected?
I don't see her connected, Glenn. She was having trouble at the beginning.
So I ran into Rebecca and her husband Tuesday night up in the North Hills of Pittsburgh at the Northland Library. I've been going around 2 or 3 times a month making a presentation on the air war over Europe, mostly about the 8th Air Force, but I bring in the 15th and the 9th as well, just to sort of try to complete the story. And it's been very well received, usually 25, 30 people. Almost all of them have a loved one that served in the war, not necessarily the air war, but in many cases, the 8th Air Force. And Rebecca's father was Donald Fogel, and he was with the 100th Bomb Group, 418th Bomb Squadron, later in the war. Came to England in 1944. Even though he had joined the Army Air Corps before it was the Army Air Forces in 1939 out of high school, became a mechanic. And it's not very clear. They don't have a lot of records of his service, but became a mechanic and served as a mechanic for a long time, and then was promoted. Sometimes I wonder whether I'd consider it a promotion to be engineer, top gunner, and completed 35 missions later in the war. And here's a picture of him. And right here in the middle, he passed away 10 years ago. Technical Sergeant Donald R. Fogel, 418th Bomb Squadron, 118th Bomber Group, from says Allegheny and Fayette County. For those of you not from Western Pennsylvania, the Fayette County is right next to Allegheny County, borders on it. So unfortunately, this is his crew. I'm not quite sure which one he is. I'm trying to get Rebecca to do a little bit more research on him and honor his service as well. So perhaps more about him once we dig into his service a bit more. I love finding, and it's probably because my own father was a mechanic, I love finding these men who served on the ground, part of the support group, behind the scenes, who don't get the notoriety. And I see somebody waving their hand, Mike's iPhone. Who is that? Is that Rebecca?
I'll ask to unmute. We'll see who that is.
Yes, that is Rebecca. I recognize her.
Yeah, we've been watching the whole time.
Oh, great. I know we had some trouble connecting at first. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, great. It's been very interesting. I've enjoyed it very much tonight. My husband and I are both watching.
Great. Great.
Are you new to the 100th? I don't recognize your.
I guess Oh, my dad was, I guess, never attended anything all these years. He's deceased now. He'd probably be 101. Because, but yeah, he did great in the war. It was one of his best parts of his life. He wasn't injured. It had on his discharge papers 0 injuries. So it's really uncanny to me listening to all this, how so many people died and how their planes crashed and everything. So he was very lucky.
You should reach out to the 100th Bomb Group Foundation. It's easy to get us. Actually, if you have Glenn's contact, he can put you in direct contact with me. If you have a lot of 100th Bomb Group people, my father was in the 100th. In 2 weeks from tonight, we are doing a show on Rosie, who was my dad's closest friend, flew with the 100th. Everyone's talked about him. Harry Crosby, and our roles in Masters of the Air in the background. So Sam Rosenthal, the grandson of Rosie, and Rebecca Hutchinson, the daughter of Harry Crosby. So there's a lot of us out there. So tune back in or reach out. We'd love to.
Well, I just attended Glenn's. He was up at our local library the other night, and I went because I saw that it was this bomb group, and it was very interesting. So he asked me if I could send some information about my father.
Well, and Jim Blakely, what he was talking about, that was mostly 4/18th.
Jim,
it was before, yeah.
Jim has a nice surprise for Rebecca, because Jim and I were talking about this before, because I went on the foundation website.
Okay.
Not find Don Fogel's name, under personnel, but Jim has a surprise.
Really? Okay.
Jim? Oh, we need to unmute Jim, Brad.
Yeah, he is unmuted. He should be talking.
Jim, you need to hit the unmute button. Jim. Let's give it a second.
Well, Jim, if you could hear us, you can open up the book and show the picture. You should be able to. You're unmuted right now.
I'm on. Okay, so
there we go.
When Glenn said that you weren't on the 100th Bomb Group website, which has most of the people, I looked in a book called Contrails, which was the first book published after the war, and it's like a high school album.
Oh,
pictures and names of
that's good.
They could get a hold of. Your dad is in here. I found it, and
that's great.
We'll see that we get it on the website.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Yeah, I was surprised his name wasn't on the foundation website, but I'm sure there's a few names here and there that are missed. But he did serve in this very famous bomber group and a very famous squadron, and in fact, had to have walked past Blakely many times. I don't know if they ever spoke, but they were at the same time.
Right, I saw Mr. Blakely became like the head squadron.
He was the squadron commander. He would have known your dad, because he would know everybody in the squadron, and he stayed on past his 25 mission and was in base training. He was there for the duration of the war.
Yeah. Rebecca, when did your dad fly his missions? Because if he came in as a mechanic, that's why he would probably not be in the database. He did not come over as an air crew. Not all ground crew got in the files. So we would want to add him.
Or like 44 or something, because I just found papers that he started out like just being a mechanic repairing planes. Yeah. And that took this training to be the top turret.
Yeah, and that's why. And we would love to fill in the story. So let us know.
Okay, thank you.
Rebecca, you'd be in great hands with these people from the 100th Bomb.
I can.
I've gotten to know them over the past couple of months. They're just a fountain of knowledge and energy. And I'm convinced it all comes from Lucky Luckadoo. He started it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yes, he's our guiding spirit for
You're
sure.
giving me too much credit.
No, don't
Well, I
think
got-
so.
He keeps us on our toes.
Well, I want to thank everybody. It's past 8:30 now. And Brad, thank you so much for riding wingman for me. You're a stellar Marine. Whatever it takes, you get it done.
I'll take a B+ on that, just like you.
And John, Rebecca, thank you for being on. Nancy, thank you for being on. If I'm missing anybody, Jim Blakely, of course. You just do wonderful, wonderful work. And somewhere down the road, in a month or so, we'll come back to that Bremen mission because that's such a fascinating discussion. Okay. And Lucky, you're a gem. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Everybody have a great evening.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
You.